gardening charity based in Coventry. As you'll see, we are recording this evening's webinar. So if you'd rather not be on camera, feel free to just turn your camera off. I'm joined by my colleague Paddy from Auto from Garden Organic, who's going to be doing keeping an eye on the chat and helping in the background, and Connor from Social Farms and Gardens, who we're very grateful to for setting up this evening's webinar. And shortly I'll introduce you to Rokia Yaman, who's going to be our speaker this evening. Just to let you know, for those who haven't been to one of these before, this is part of a regular series of webinars that has been organised by Social Farms and Gardens. They happen roughly every 2 months. And there's another one coming up in November on a very interesting topic, and Connor's going to pop the details for that in the chat, so do keep an eye out. As I say, we're recording tonight's webinar so that we can share it with people who can't make it. If you could keep yourselves on mute, that would be brilliant, so that everybody gets good audio. If you have any difficulties with streaming at all, then fine to just pop out and pop back in, and we'll spot you in the waiting room and let you back in. I don't think I need to say any more at this point. So without further ado, I'm very delighted to hand you over for her talk on setting up urban circular bioeconomies from the ground up. Rokia Yaman, Managing Director of Mad Leap.
Hi there, thank you. Hi, thanks, Kate. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Rokia from Mad Leap, and I'm going to take you through a little presentation. I'll explain in a minute the kind of structure of it. So hopefully I'm going to get this sharing bit right. Hold on 1 minute and tell me when you can see that slideshow. Is that showing now?
Yes.
Yeah, that's showing.
Brilliant. Okay. So that's the first hurdle out of the way. So I'm going to kind of run through a number of slides, and first of all, I'll focus on our initial vision, our kind of thinking behind what we've been doing over the last kind of 10 years or so. And then I'll go into some of the prototyping that we've done in order to test the theories. We've done this across 3 sites in London. And then Kathleen, my colleague who'll be joining soon, is going to give a little case study on one of the sites, one of the prototyping sites. Then I'll go on to what we're doing at the moment, which is currently scaling up everything that we've learned and putting it onto another 3 sites, which are in East London. I'll touch on at the end some points about the economics of it. And I understand that some of you are kind of interested, particularly in that area. So when we go into the Q&A at the end, we can expand on that much more, but I've just included a few slides with a few figures to open that up. And then the very last slide is shiny stuff for anybody who likes stainless steel types of bits of kit. There's just a bit on that because we're linked with a kind of a more tech development company as well. So without further ado, so I'm gonna, hang on a minute, just slightly rearrange my screen so I don't see too many other bits. So what we address is pretty similar to any community composting project. It's around waste reduction, waste recycling, net zero carbon. Access to healthy food is something because we want to close the loop basically. So our project is extended beyond managing the waste and therefore it's circular economy. And hang on a minute, that's not working. Okay, so then we just have a slightly different starting point maybe in that we started off looking at micro anaerobic digestion. For those of you who know the technology, it's and those of you who watch the Archers maybe, it's a technology that is similar to composting except it happens in a sealed environment. So anywhere where there's very little oxygen, it could happen naturally underground, underwater, and in this case in sealed tanks. And it can take any type of organic waste, from manure to crop waste to food waste, and the only thing it can't do actually is woody waste, and so that's where it kind of works quite well with composting. But then it produces biogas, which is about 60% methane, 40% CO2, and a biofertilizer, which is a liquid that basically captures all the nutrients and the other kind of suspended solids that are in the digester. The kinds of applications we've been looking at are urban and off-grid communities, contract catering, hospitals and prisons, schools and universities, small-scale farms and agri-businesses, and parks and green spaces. And we've spoken to all of representatives from all of those sectors. But our kind of key objectives really are to kind of put climate action within the bounds of people on the ground, to help to create green jobs and training opportunities, and also to help shift behavior. That's quite a big sort of component of what we're trying to do, really, is to demonstrate the value of waste, which this does, and then to increase local resilience and self-sufficiency by using those byproducts to replace non-renewable inputs. So what's really the big deal about AD? Mainly when people think about AD or anaerobic digestion, it's about the gas that it produces. And it's the 60% methane that's the important bit. So I just wanted to show you this slide to give you a sense of how kind of impactful methane is as a greenhouse gas. So what you're seeing in the top, like, sorry, I hope you can see my cursor here. What you can see in the top kind of grid is, let's say there's 100 square circles here. It's basically telling us that about 82% of our greenhouse gas emissions is carbon dioxide. And then there's 9% here of methane, and other greenhouse gases, another 9%. So that's the breakdown of the emissions. However, if we look at just the heat trapping effects of those gases, 95 of the heat trapping effect comes from the methane, because it's much more potent a greenhouse gas than CO2. And the latest figures on that are around about 86 times more potent than CO2 over a 20-year period. So if we can target that methane, and divert food waste from landfill, which composting also does, that's a really kind of big driver away from climate warming. So we kind of started off with a model in mind, and what we wanted to do was to decentralize waste management, as all the community composting kind of projects do as well. We wanted to have on-site equipment that you could drop in easily and link with food production, and then send that food to be locally, for local consumption, and in that way avoid waste traveling long distances to be processed. When we've modeled it, so we've created kind of quite a complicated modeling tool, looking at the carbon savings and the inputs and outputs. We found that if we were to manage a ton of food waste a day, and grow across something like 1,000 square meters, then we'd be saving 73 tons of CO2 a year, compared with business as usual. And the whole kind of model is actually net negative carbon. So in terms of the technology itself, we've looked to containerize it, because that's the easiest way to really kind of drop things in and out and make them easy to install. Obviously, we started off with a focus on anaerobic digestion, but we've kind of expanded to include composting, and in-vessel composting in particular, and also combine the byproducts, the use of the byproducts, with hydroponics as well as raised bed growing. What we're really after is to try and create a replicable model, something that we can propose, and it be modular, so that it doesn't always have to include AD. It could just be the in-vessel composting with food production, but something that can be proposed that could be scaled across neighborhoods, let's say, and be part of the sort of move towards decarbonisation. So this is a visualization we did with the University of Kent, visualizing a community cafe and the growing infrastructure and the waste management infrastructure in one place here, and then spread out across, this is the Teviot estate in East London, taking into account their existing green spaces and making full use of those. So if we can somehow break the, sort of crack the challenge, basically, of making it economically viable, even if we have to do some fundraising alongside it, then it's much easier to replicate and scale this, and link then with shorter circular supply chains, so we can kind of bring that sort of model of local economic activity more into the kind of mainstream, which is already becoming, but it kind of, I feel like it needs more of a push. So we started off probably about 10 years ago now, prototyping this concepts. And these are some of the pictures from the early systems that we set up. This was a system that was set up at Camley Street Natural Park. And that's near King's Cross in London, central London. And there we were processing something like, what was it, 25 kilos of food waste a day. It had a macerator. So this first picture top left is a hammer mill. It goes into the first tank, and then it goes from there into a second tank. And in the second tank, that's where you have the breakdown occurring with the methanogens, which produce the methane and the biogas. There's a not too complicated control system here. And the whole thing operated for about 4.5 years altogether. So we had worked with Leeds University, and they had a paper written up about that. There's another picture up on the top right here. That's a 2 cubic meter anaerobic digester integrated with solar PV and a solar thermal panel as well. So this is just exploring what you can do by integrating different renewables. Unlike composting, anaerobic digestion does require a bit of heat to maintain temperature, and ideally around kind of body temperature, 35, 36, 37 degrees. So there is a bit of a heat input, but then the parasitic load, or what we call the parasitic load, which is the amount of energy that you put into the process, is estimated to be between 15 and 30% of what you produce in terms of energy. So that's the kind of energy balance of the technology. This is just pictures from another site, so another prototyping living lab site in London. This was on the Olympic Park site. You can see people coming and learning new skills. We were building from scratch this shipping container here, which had a small digester in it. Again, it was about a cubic meter in size. The gas holder is the kind of cylinder you can see next to it. And then we planned for wind, and we had some solar panels up on the roof. So it was quite ambitious for a small community energy hub. But it was a great learning experience. And we went every weekend. We had lunch all together. People kind of learned how to do very practical skills. A lot of the cladding came from the Olympic Park fencing. So there was a lot of recycling going on. And in the end, we got this built, and then it moved to another site. So pictures from the third living lab site, and these are growing trials. So by this time, we realized we really need to close the loop. So in order to do that, we have to test the byproducts out and see how they do within a trial. So this was a kind of a randomized control trial at the Calthorpe project, again in central London. We built a few different versions of hydroponics, and then this is the one on the far right is the one that we kind of settled on to do our trials with. So I don't know if anyone's had any hydroponic experience, but it's quite something to see when you put, this was after about, I guess, 3 weeks growth from a seedling to this, albeit in ideal conditions. This was in the summer, about 20 degrees. But this was using basically the liquid fertilizer, the biofertilizer from the digester in the reservoir tanks at the bottom, and then pumping them up to the top of the towers, and then it would just kind of drip down, pass through the roots, and there's no soil. Basically, that's the feature of hydroponics, is that it's soilless. And we wanted to see how well it worked. I believe the control is on the left-hand side, and the middle one and the one to the far right are the ones that had digestate. So there's not huge amounts of difference in the rate of growth, and possibly even slightly greater growth in the one on the right-hand side. So it's quite comparable. Next slide. So I don't know if Kathleen, my colleague, is here. If you are, just say something. But she's currently in Hungary, where there've been very bad flooding, so she might still be on her way in. No, okay, so I'm gonna
Catherine's with us,
she is?
Rokia.
Okay.
She might be talking with her
Kathleen,
mic.
do you?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, I arrived. Sorry for being late. I was a little bit optimistic, but I'm here.
Welcome, Kathleen. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. So what I would like to talk about is the third center that Rokia mentioned in her presentation. That's called Calthorpe Community Garden. And we were working together with Carthorpe since 2016, and that was our second partner site where we could basically create a closed loop system. And we are not really in a daily touch with them anymore, but since this year marks the 5th year of when the project was fully working, I went back and interviewed the manager who is managing the composting center and the closed loop now, and asked what is their experience after 5 years. So what we have to know about the site: it is in central London, very, very near King's Cross. It features 1 hectare green space, of which I think 1/4 used for growing. And it has a community growing area and also has individual raised beds. I think altogether 20 individual, really small plots. And at the time when we were working together with them, the communities was very active in growing. It has changed a little since, and I'm going to talk about it, how and why it has changed. And when we set up our system, they had a local cafe that I think didn't was there before we started our trial. Is that correct, Rokia? So the cafe
Yeah.
was set up because we wanted to close the loop, and what we produced in the garden, we wanted to have the cafe that can use the products on site. So when please, can you, Rokia, give me the next slide? So we called it the Carthorpe Living Lab, and as you see, that's the community. What you see on the picture is the community growing area, and the community cafe is also added to the picture, but actually that was in the other side of the garden, nearer to the street, when it was easy to access it from the streets when people was walking by. So what we created here when we arrived, they already had 2 polytunnels. The polytunnels are in the area where you see the greenhouse circle and the hydroponics circle. So that's a bigger and the smaller polytunnel. And the smaller gray squares are the growing beds, the raised beds that they use for community vegetable growing. And when we arrived, basically we built a small-scale anaerobic digester that was a little bit different from the previous one that we had at Camley Street, because here we really wanted to create something that is entirely off-grid. So we placed solar panels on top of the building that we were hoping that would provide the heat that we will need for the process. And I don't know if Rokia would like to add something here, but we always had some issues with the solar panels. So we never fully managed to be off-grid in terms of anaerobic digestion. Do you want to add something, Rokia, or is that enough about that?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay, so then what we wanted to achieve here is basically create a system that manages food waste entirely. First, only the food waste that's been created on site, but later on, and I will talk about that a little bit, also food waste that people living in the neighborhood could bring in. Then we had the anaerobic digestion, and eventually we created a compost center, a community compost center that is still ongoing on that site. And with all these activities, we wanted to create a community that not also manages and uses the site and takes advantage of the composting and the food growing, but also learns about how to live more sustainably, even at home. Can you please, Rokia, give me the next slide? Okay, so what we started with, when we arrived to the site, they had what you can see on the left, the traditional compost piles that they used for collecting garden waste, nothing else. So they had a cafe, they had a kitchen, but they sent the food waste that they generated in the kitchen to landfill or for collection, but they already collected their garden waste from the garden, and they also had some plastic compost containers that they didn't really use, but sometimes put some food waste or garden waste into these bins. Rokia, can you please give me the next slide? And so what you see on the left, the top left, basically that was the biggest addition to the garden in the first few years. That was an anaerobic digester, and we use this picture because here you can see the digester, how it looked like. But at the Carthorpe, we had a cladding around the digester, but it looked pretty much the same. And what you can see, Rokia, can you please circle around the hopper when we could feed the digester? That's the macerator, but what we used at Carthorpe, the hopper on the digester itself. Yes. So at the Camley Street, we put the food waste into the macerator, but at the Carthorpe Community Garden, we put the food waste directly into the digester. That meant that we had to separate the food waste, so we always needed volunteers to help us with that process. And then we had some ladders, so we had to put the food waste into the digester. And it was, I think, a little bit simpler setup than the one we had at Camley Street. Is that right, Rokia?
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything was manual here, and we had some blockages and some issues. So there was lots to learn about small scale digesters here. And the next step, what you see at the bottom, are the maturation boxes, because from the very first moment when a digester starts working, what you end up if you put something into a compost pile, while it's the process going on, it shrinks to 1/3. With the digestate, if you add 10 kilograms of food waste into a digester, since it is a closed system, what you get in a form of liquid digestate is 9.5 liters of digestate. And that's basically an issue, because if you feed just 10 kilograms per day, you can imagine how much liquid we ended up with. So what we figured, and that's why we built these maturation boxes, if we mixed digestate with garden waste, and basically these maturation boxes were insulated from the inside, then we could create really nice compost just within 6 weeks if the temperature was right. And once we had a microscope on site, and we learned that this compost is because in the digester we have anaerobic bacteria, but if you mix the and the anaerobic bacteria still have in the digestate, but if you mix it with garden waste and let it in a half open maturation box, all the anaerobic bacteria die, and we ended up having a really nice compost in that way. Our next step was the wormery. So we get the worms, because at this point we already started to invite people into the garden that they could bring in their own food waste. Obviously, it was an invitation-only system. So it wasn't like people could walk in from the street and bring in anything that what they wanted. So they came to workshops and lessons. They worked with us, they volunteered with us, and if they were interested and we thought they would be good for the project, they could bring in their food waste. It meant that eventually we started to have lots of food waste, different kind of food waste. So we started to separate it, and we already knew what we could put into the digester, what we can use in the normal compost piles, and then for experimental purposes, we started a wormery as well. The third step was adding the ride-on composter. The ride-on composter is an in-vessel composter. It's very mechanical, so you see this white hat-like or little house-like structure. That's where you feed the ride-on. What you have to do, you have to make sure, like in every kind of composting, that you have to mix your food waste with the same amount of dry material. It can be wood pellet, wood chips, or in this case, we created our own wood chips, so we mixed the food waste with that. This ride-on is a medium-sized ride-on that can manage 150 kilograms of food waste per week. And the food waste spends 2 weeks in the cylinder. You can't really see it, but on the left side, there is a handle that you can turn the food waste. And on the right side at the bottom, it's an open system. The half composted food waste comes out from the system, and then you can again put it into maturation boxes. And there is, again, it depends on the ambient temperature, but within 3-6 months, you're gonna have really nice compost. So the ride-on was our next addition, and the last one was leaf mold in the back of the wild garden. So since 2016, Calthorpe is collecting their leaves from the garden separately in leaf mold piles. And just last week, when I went back, we used that leaf mold from last year to top up the beds for the next year. It's half composted at the moment, so it can be used as a soil amender, but also the less composted bits of the leaf mold, they work as cover for the beds for the winter. Okay, during this time, we also, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, that one of our goals was creating a composting community in central London. So those are the steps that in 2017-16 we were collecting food waste only from the local cafe. And what I didn't mention that, so we had food growing activities on site. So the cafe, it was really a closed loop. So the cafe got mostly leafy vegetables from the garden. They collected the food waste in separate bins, and the bins came back to the garden again, where volunteers sorted it, and then it went into different composters. So first in 2017, we were only collecting food waste from the local cafe. Then 2019-18, we've been setting up the new composting facilities I was just talking about. And at the same time, we were running several workshops and training around food growing, composting, and sustainability. And also in 2019, what Rokia said, at Poplar, we helped them to create a very similar system. So they also have a ride-on, they also have maturation boxes, they also had a wormery, and also food growing areas. They didn't have a cafe, but they did have a containerized kitchen where they still can use their food waste that they grow on site. And during this time, by 2020, we created a waste management documentation and started to invite people from the local community. And this time we had the capacity and could invite 2 cafes as well. So 1 cafe and 1 kind of local kitchen that was a pop-up kitchen where people was cooking for homeless people using local products and bringing their food waste into the garden. And yes, 5 years later, so we still have what remained. Yeah, so they still have the wormery, they still have the Rhydon, and they still use the green waste piles that are working very well. The composting lab is still working, but there are fewer people at the moment. So I think there are only 2 or 3 people at the moment who are still bringing in their food waste regularly. And when we started the project, and for the next 2 years before and just after the pandemic, I think we had 15 members and 10 active members. So it has dropped a little bit. They still run workshops around sustainability. And oh yeah, which is very, very important, that when we started, we decided that we were going to collect every data possible that we can collect. So even how much food, very detailed by crops, how much food we've grown, how much digestate we used, how much, and everything, all the information about the digester. So they are still doing that. They are still collecting the data. What has changed? Unfortunately, the pandemic closed the cafe because there was no customers, but the park managed to create, what was the name? So they cooked every day or every week. They cooked for people in need, local people in need. They had food from the Felix project and everything that they could use from the garden, and they cooked. I think there was a time when they was cooking for more than 50 people per week.
Kathleen, I'm just going to quickly interrupt just to say if we speed up a little bit, we might.
Okay, so now they have fewer volunteers. There was next door, there was a huge construction going on that obviously caused some difficulties in the garden. But on the positive side, they started to have bokashis. So they added bokashi to the system. And the lessons we learned that small-scale digesters are a great educational feature for a park, but has some issues that we still have to solve. The biggest challenge is still what we can do with the digestate, because if you use your digestate properly, that creates lots of digestate. And keeping a system like that, it requires a dedicated member of staff that really hands-on and doesn't mind if there are some issues. And the collected data, since now they have lots of data, can be used for fundraising applications really successfully. That's it.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Kathleen.
I think half of it is
Okay.
missing. Yeah, that's it.
All right. So I'm going to move on now to scaling up. So this is what we're currently doing. We've taken all the lessons that we've had over the years, and we were very lucky to get some funding from the LLDC, which is the London Legacy Development Corporation. So they've funded 3 sites where we kind of increase the size and the scope of what we're doing. So this is the first site. It's Gainsborough Primary School in Hackney Wick. It's a primary school with about 200 odd kids. They had large areas of playground that weren't very well utilized. And so when we started off with, they had a number of raised beds, so that we started off in the raised beds there. But what we had the funding for was to install about 200 square meters of polytunnel there, an in-vessel composter, and we linked everything with the curriculum. So we have a dedicated educational person who can basically use the infrastructure that we've got there to demonstrate to the kids the value of waste, which comes from the kitchen, It gets composted. The compost is used in the raised beds, but also we've got another polytunnel there, which we installed hydroponic towers in. So this is it in the installation process. We had some young people who came to learn with us. These are the towers down here, bottom right, before they got planted up. And here is our first crop with our hydroponic grower, an educational person, and one of our trainees. So we started off some green skills training. And the idea of the hydroponics, so with the compost that gets used in the raised beds, so there's your closed loop there. With the hydroponics, we're using the biofertilizer or the digestate from a digester to use as a nutrient solution. So that is dosed into a reservoir tank, which you can't see in this picture, but that then gets irrigated around all the pipework that you can see above the towers and gets kind of sprayed through into the towers. So it's a kind of, this particular type of hydroponics is a mixture of aeroponics, which is the misting kind of way of applying nutrients and water, and it also drips down, so that's hydroponics. And then that returns to the reservoir tank. So this is about 10 times more water efficient than growing in soil, but it's not to replace growing in soil. It's just another thing that you can do. And it's particularly good where you need, let's say, lightweight infrastructure, because this is plastic, quite light, simple infrastructure. This is just a few shots of the green skills training program we set up. So we set up green skills training in hydroponics, in raised bed growing and composting, and also in mushroom growing, which I'll go on to in a minute. So site 2, we are on a site where there's an architect's kind of managed space. They've turned a load of garages into workspaces, and outside there's a load of raised beds which are let out to the resident community to use as mini allotments. In 2 of the garages, we've made a mushroom farm, because our kind of model is really, with this scaling up kind of part of our process, we're really trying to see if we can prove a business case for this sort of thing. And that's one of the key objectives, as well as testing the environmental kind of assumptions that we've made, and also seeing if we can really actually help to shift behavior by making all of this stuff visible. So mushrooms we chose as one of the crops to grow because they're quite high value, and there's other types of products that can run alongside it, like mushroom growing kits and training to grow mushrooms and that sort of thing. So we're still getting to grips with it. This is you can't see Alani, but these are her hands, and then these are the mushrooms that she's growing quite early on. So they're not difficult to grow. There can be some issues. We've come across certain issues, but we're kind of overcoming those now. So like any kind of thing, I guess, you always have certain teething problems, but at the same time, you can see how well they can also grow in this picture here. On site 2 as well, so site 2 kind of expands slightly beyond that site that I was talking about just now, to Manorfield Primary School, which is a nearby school. You can see lots of flat roof space here. And what we've managed to do is to get planning permission to put up a polytunnel on one of these roofs. And again, that will be with hydroponics, because on the roof space, you don't want to have a heavy load. So there will be some raised beds at the edges to kind of anchor it down, but in the middle it will be hydroponic towers. And again, using the biofertilizer or digestate from the nearby digester. So site 3, this is the last site, is basically, this is another social housing estate. And there's planning in progress at the moment for a larger digester here. So that digester is going to take about 280 kilos of food waste a day, compared with, let's say, the 25 from one of the previous smaller prototypes. The biogas there we're looking to use in a community sauna, and also for on-site catering, as well as pasteurization for the mushroom substrate that we'll be growing there too. These are just pictures of this is the estate here. It's in the Olympic Park kind of area next to Stratford Station, and we'll be sort of housing these things in shipping containers on the car park there. So just a few figures. So this is I picked out the Teviot estate, which was the second site, and that digester that will be installed there will take 100 kilos a day. It produces 3,000 odd cubic meters of biogas a year, or it will do. The carbon saving for that is 8.34 tons a year, and the payback is about 5.78. This is using the kind of roughly the latest figures, but in real life is always different from this kind of modeling. So these figures were more optimistic to begin with. They've become a bit more realistic now, and I suspect by the end of the project they're going to be even more realistic. The features of this site are that there's no current food waste collection in place, and as you probably know, flats are particularly challenging to collect food waste from. And so we're hoping to engage the community by having this kind of infrastructure there and showing them that their food waste can be turned into energy and fertilizer and used to grow food. So the big challenge really here is to help to shift behavior. Just as a kind of a contrast, the Carpenter's Estate Site 3, that waste capacity will be 300 kilos a day, so 3 times as big. The payback has gone down, so that's 3.96 years at the moment. The carbon savings at 20 tons a year. But I've used the same size food growing there just so that we can see the difference if we just change one parameter. And at each site we're working with different stakeholders to achieve this. This is the shiny bits of kit that I managed to mention at the beginning. There is a reason for showing this. This is what's happening at our workshop, which is in Wiltshire. We have a fabrication workshop there where we make anaerobic digestion systems, but also the issue that Kathleen mentioned earlier about the digestate or the biofertilizer is a very real and significant issue across the whole of the AD sector. So just to kind of give you a picture, in the UK, there's probably about 600, 700 digesters across the country. They're largely operating, let's say, at farm scale or industrial scale, compared with our micro scale. And in Germany, which is the country with the largest number of digesters, they have about, I think it's over 9,000 digesters there now. So it's like a huge number. And the issues they're having with digestate at the moment are that in some cases, if they don't have enough land space to spread it on, and this is the same in the UK, they have to either pay or give it away, pay for it to be taken away or give it away. And then it's got to be shipped somewhere. In the UK, it's shipped fairly locally, but in Germany, because of the large number of plants there and the fact that they're saturating the soil, or they're using up their land banks rather in their area, sometimes it's having to travel up to 100 kilometers. So the equipment that you're seeing here is basically part of a European project that we initiated, and it ran for 45 months, quite a significant project with 15 partners. We were the main technology partner, and we developed this technology to basically recover grey water from the digestate and recover nutrients into a compact form. We're about 70% of the way there, so we're kind of in progress at the moment. But this is, if we manage to kind of take this next step, then we can basically not just alleviate problems for large scale plants, but also unlock the market for urban micro scale anaerobic digestion. So I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully we've not run too much over time, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a few questions. I'll stop sharing now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rokia and Kathleen. That's so interesting. There's more in there than I could digest in the short time available, but I'm sure there'll be a few questions coming in. We've actually got one already from Ollie in the chat. They do use a special pump for the digestate to feed the hydroponic system, and does this system run on the mains or solar?
Right. So in theory, yes, it could run on solar. But ours isn't. Ours is running on the mains. We just don't have somewhere to put the solar at this point. But the pump, it's kind of, we've got a cabinet with a decent sized pump in there. The pump is taking our liquid fertilizer, let's say, from a reservoir tank and pumping it around the whole system. So there's one pump for that. I think it's probably about 1 kilowatt, something like that. And then we've got several smaller delivery pumps which basically dose that reservoir system, and we've got like maybe 3 or 4 containers. So one container has a pH down solution in it, so it controls the pH level in the reservoir tank. One is the nutrient solution, so that's digestate in our case. And there'll be another one which is like a water conditioner, which maybe has some hydrogen peroxide in it. So that runs off a control system. and is dosed in on an automated basis with a couple of sensors in the reservoir tank to measure the EC and the pH.
Great, thank you. That answers your question, Ollie, hopefully.
Yeah.
John says, can you talk about the finances and funding for all of this?
Yes, of course. So we were really lucky to get funding to do this without, it's completely grant funded at risk, but there was a match funding obligation. So basically, the figures that I showed you are kind of based on paying back with the equipment costs included. That's the theoretical side of it. It should on paper it should stand up, but in reality, I think probably many of you here might know that selling food is really not an easy proposition. It's not easy to make money selling food. Part of that is to do with, I guess we're still in our first year of scale up, so we've not fully got to grips with the system. We've not fully maximized the hydroponics. What we have seen is that the hydroponics can be really productive. So we're hoping next year is going to be better. But we've had a few issues in terms of supply and demand. Either we're not producing enough for certain customers, or we're producing too much and of other things, and we're having to kind of find another use for it. So I think our issues have been around kind of practical things like marketing and sales, not quite managing to get that right. On paper it should work, but realistically, I kind of, having spoken to many other people now about it, I think we're not going to make the business case, the model work on food sales alone. It's going to be down to other products as well. And this is kind of borne out by other organizations who've gone down this kind of path. We're looking at selling things like mushroom growing kits, seed sowing kits. Training is kind of a big thing that we're going to be looking into. So having set up the AQA training, we're now looking to see, can we monetize that in some way? Because there'll be people who want to learn about this. And going forwards, we're also looking at strategies to do with the equipment itself. How can we make that equipment cheaper? So we're looking at mobilizing some of the kit so that piece of kit can be shared between several sites, or many sites rather, and bring the cost and the operational complexity down on each individual site. I mean, sorry, yeah, it was a bit overwhelming. So yeah, I don't know if you want to ask anything more specific about the finances than that. That's a very kind of high level.
So I guess the question that comes to my mind off the back of what you said is could it potentially, I know that you've been working with various kind of community interests. Is there potential for the model to be sort of distributed in more kind of collaborative ways, so that you've got somebody, providing the composting AD function, and somebody else who's providing the route to market, that kind of thing, potentially?
Yeah, that would potentially work really well, because at the moment we're trying to do everything, and it's really overstretching, I think, our small organization. So I think to work collaboratively and possibly cooperatively maybe would be good. So really, I guess we kind of see it as an ecosystem that would develop. So you'd link in with food enterprises that might then turn your produce into something higher value. And yes, we would plan to sell compost so that it's possible, as you know, to make compost under PAS 110, which enables you to then sell it. The digestate is more difficult because the end of waste criteria for that compost is PAS 100, but digestate is PAS 110, and that's really, really onerous and difficult to comply with. So we wouldn't sell the digestate, but we would replace the need for buying in a liquid fertilizer. Let's say for hydroponics, that's quite a lot of save costs. Hydroponic nutrient solution is quite expensive.
Okay, thank you. That's I'm just checking to see if we've missed anything. Oh yeah, Joe says, you just addressed Diana's question, I think, haven't you, with the PAS 100. Do you have a recommendation for effective data capture for quantities of food waste process and resources to calculate emissions of in-vessel composting versus landfill versus anaerobic digesting?
We do. We had a tool made for us, and Joe, if you want to get in touch, I can see if I can share some parts of that. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's would be the easiest thing.
Nikki's question is, could you give a bit of an idea about the setup cost for a small AD plant like Camley?
Okay, so what we figured out was setup cost for a small digester is never going to pay back unless if you want to go down the funded route and you want it as an educational system, then it's okay. But a setup cost for a small plant, I don't know, it's going to be around the 20k mark or something like that. But there are other models, and actually you can get things from overseas. So if you look at the Chinese Puxin models, you could get one for quite a bit cheaper. It's just so much cheaper from there. So, you might want to look at that. But the thing about digesters is in a warm sort of temperate climate, you don't need to really heat it, and you may not be mixing it. They don't kind of optimize the process there. Whereas when it comes to a cold climate, you're probably going to need to mix and heat it, and that's where the cost comes in. So when we've started to look at the business modeling more, we've had to kind of increase the size to make it so it becomes more community scale, let's say.
Yes, I have does anybody else want to chip in, put their hand up? I've got loads of questions.
I think Diana asked what the fungal properties are of digesters.
The fungal properties, that's interesting. Really, I'm not sure. I'm not aware of there being fungal properties in digestate, but I do know that if you add spent mushroom compost or spent mushroom substrate into digesters, it helps to increase the biogas yield somehow. I don't know what the mechanism is, but that's something that we'd like to test at the next stage. But yeah, in terms of the digestate, it comes out with anaerobic microbes, but on kind of contact with the air, they kind of, I don't know if they shift or change, but they're no longer anaerobic after that.
Okay, thank you. And Diana's just wanted to clarify whether so the compost meets PAS 100 standards,
Yeah,
which you plan to sell, but digestate you're not planning to sell.
didn't quite understand the question. So does the garden waste with digest meet PAS 100 standards? The digestate, the anaerobic digestion process has to meet PAS 110. The digestate has to meet PAS 110, so it's a different standard. And it adds on something like 2 days of admin to a site's operation. So only the really large plants meet PAS 110. So we couldn't sell the digestate, but we could maybe create a club, let's say a membership, and sort of distribute it in that way. There could be other ways of doing things, basically.
Cool.
Does the garden? Sorry, go on.
I did have one question. Is your focus going to be on anaerobic digesters going forward, or are you looking at all other types of composting?
I think we will kind of stick with the digestion for a while, and I think the last slide that I showed you with the technology to manage surplus digestate is something that could really change things for large and small scale AD.
Could you just say a little bit more about that? So you were talking about turning it into like a solid material, the surplus digestate, is that right?
Yeah. So that's a bit of a process which we're kind of going into at the moment, but I'm not sure I can talk too much about that yet because it's still in progress. But I'm just sorry.
Am I right in understanding that sometimes the byproduct is it exceeds the demand?
Yeah, because as Kathleen was saying, when you put, it doesn't, when you compost something, it reduces in volume a lot. When you digest it, it doesn't reduce in volume very much. And so you end up with a lot of liquid and nutrients, which is very environmentally valuable because it captures all the nitrogen that was in the feedstock. Whereas when you compost it, the nitrogen some of it goes into the atmosphere. So that nitrogen being highly energy intensive to make, it's quite high, it's a valuable environmental product. But it's the handling of it because it's so full of water, it's quite bulky and not very easily transportable. So what we're trying to do is to recover the grey water as a big fraction that can then be used flexibly on site, either for irrigation or toilet flushing or what have you. And we want to recover the nutrient into a solid form. So that's the bit that we're kind of working on at the moment, and it's a bit of a technical issue. So we're looking to work with the University of Edinburgh on it. And I think one other thing, just to clarify, when Catherine was talking about mixing the digestate with composted with the composting process, it does work really well, and it's just unfortunate that the position for composting, the environmental kind of exemption for composting, the T23, doesn't allow for mixing at the moment anaerobic material in with compost. So while it does work really well, they won't currently allow it under that exemption. So if you're not,
Catherine said something. Did she say 6 weeks? Within 6 weeks, you get a really good product, but that's adding it in the maturation phase after it's been through the rye down as well.
Kathleen, do you want to respond to that? You're muted.
Maybe you need to be invited to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it was 6 weeks during summer, but as Rokia said, even having that, we could use that compost on site, but it wasn't even a question of selling it because of the regulation. So again, that's a small scale digester. So we managed to have about 1 cubic meter of compost in 6 weeks. And I think we started a new compost pile in every 3 weeks during the experience. So we could use that in that garden because that's a 1 hectare big garden. But if there is a bigger digester and you have to use it on site locally, that again can be an issue. So we stopped doing that. And Rocky and in the fabrication workshop, they are working on another solution to turn it into a solid product. So that's basically it. But when we started that experiment 7 years ago, we just wanted to see how does it work when you mix digestate with solid material, and it worked really well. But we can't use it.
That's really fascinating stuff, and thank you for so generously sharing your findings at this stage in your research. You obviously got lots more to do and lots more to explore, and it's really interesting to hear your journey so far, and it's going to be exciting to watch what happens next as well. So thank you both ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for joining us. A few of us are just going to stay on and have a quick catch up at the end once everybody's headed off. But do check in the chat. Connor's shared the details of the next webinar, which is Thursday the 21st of November, and it's on building and using a Johnson's 2 bioreactor in community gardens. So hope to see you there. Thanks everybody. Have a lovely evening. See you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.